I've just hit the record button.
Yep.
It's just come on. I
Yep,
think we're
it
right
has.
to go.
I was waiting
Thank
for that
you.
notification. Very good. Wonderful. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our statewide staff meeting on assessment and modern languages K-10 syllabus. During this session, we'll provide an overview of a range of assessment strategies and unpack how effective assessment planning supports quality teaching and learning. As you probably know, I'm Renetta Wolf, and joining me today are Valerie Wang and Karina Allen. So we recognise the ongoing custodians of the lands and waterways where we work and live. We pay respect to elders past and present as ongoing teachers of knowledge, songlines and stories. We strive to ensure every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learner in New South Wales achieves their potential through education. I'm presenting to you today from Wiradjuri land at the foot of Wailu on the banks of the Womble in Bathurst, New South Wales. Throughout our presentation today, you will notice icons from the 8 Aboriginal ways of learning. We have included these today because we are often asked by teachers how to embed Aboriginal perspectives into their language lessons, especially since the Term 2 School Development Day, which had a focus on Aboriginal education. If you are not familiar with the 8 Aboriginal ways of learning and would like to know more, we will provide a link in the chat for you. One thing I will say now, though, is that as the name suggests, these are pedagogies indicating how something is taught, not what is taught. So they are about teaching through culture, not about culture, which is also how the new syllabus indicates we should address intercultural capabilities in our language teaching. I'll now hand over to Val, who will outline the types of assessment and share some ideas and strategies.
Thank you, Renetta. The bedrock of each of the units that we have created is the summative or end of term assessment task, and it is one of the first things that you'll see in each unit. And we are recommending that you give the task to students at the very start of each unit with the marking guidelines, so they know what language skills and intercultural capability they will develop throughout the unit. So let's take a moment to remind ourselves about summative assessment and its purpose. Summative assessment captures students' achievement at a moment in time, and usually at the end of an instructional sequence or unit. The main goal of summative assessment is to evaluate student learning at the conclusion of a unit by comparing it against the standard, and in our case, it's marking guidelines. Some examples of summative assessment include formal exams, end-of-unit projects or presentations, and assignments. And in our context, we focus on task-based assessment with purposeful language use. So if your school does have final exams, design them with the task focus in mind, and our sample assessments will guide you. The benefits of summative assessment tasks include student accountability, holding students responsible for learning the content, measurement of understanding, which is important for reporting purposes, and providing a benchmark for future learning, demonstrating a student's growth over time. So when used as a benchmark to inform next steps, a summative assessment opportunity becomes a formative assessment opportunity. And now let's have a quick reminder of formative assessment. As you know, formative assessment is used by teachers to evaluate and provide feedback on student learning during the instructional process. Formative assessment has 2 primary aims. Firstly, to identify where students are in relation to understanding and applying the content, identifying areas of strength and weakness in order to adjust future teaching methods and materials accordingly. And secondly, to close the gap between where students are now and where they need to get to. Some examples are quizzes, class discussions, exit tickets, peer feedback, teacher observation, and mini tasks, which we are going to look at closely today. There are plenty of benefits to having formative assessments, such as immediate feedback, which is known to be more effective and relevant than feedback after an end-of-unit task. Formative assessment also personalizes instructions by meeting students at their current understanding level and helping them progress. and it supports student engagement by supporting students to become active rather than passive participants in their learning. On the screen, you can see a range of ideas for formative assessment, and I'll just give you a moment to read them. In the resources we are publishing to support you in understanding and using the modern languages K-10 syllabus, you will find many suggested strategies like these and more. When it comes to quizzes, these are some of the online tools you can use for formative assessment, such as Mentimeter, Kahoot, and Plickers. And there are many, many more, which we are sure you're already using. For a great range of formative assessment activities and formative assessment tools, take a look at the New South Wales Department of Education Digital Learning Selector. Simply do an advanced filter search with the hashtag assessment, and you will find many suggested ideas in both the Learning Activities tab and the Learning Tools tab. And that's where these ideas are from. One of the forms of formative assessment we'd like to focus on today is the inclusion of what we have called mini tasks, progress checkpoints, into our sample units of work. This is a sample from our Stage 4 Japanese unit of work. It's called a mini task, as the task supports students to use language authentically and purposefully, providing the purpose, context, and audience for the communicative act. As we just saw, there is a huge range of activities and strategies to formatively assess where students are at, and our focus today will be on these mini tasks. These tasks have a context, purpose, and audience approach to stay true to the intent of the syllabus, with communication as the central goal for language learning. And in this example, creating a blog, we're also linking to the Aboriginal storytelling pedagogy. Mini tasks are short, focused formative assessment opportunities aligned to an aspect or aspects of the final end-of-unit summative assessment task. They are designed to monitor students' understanding of a specific concept or skill in real time and give teachers an immediate understanding of students' strengths and weaknesses so that teaching, which is planned to come next, can be slowed down, sped up, or modified to meet students at their point of need. Mini tasks also offer opportunities for immediate feedback, supporting students to reflect on their progress and identify areas of strength as well as skills they need to develop. This can increase student engagement and make learning much more interactive. I'll now hand back to Renetta to discuss how these assessment strategies are applied in our support materials.
Thanks, Val. So at the heart of assessment in our support materials is backward mapping. Backward mapping is a way to provide a plan for learning, and you can backward map across years of schooling, within a year, within a term, and even within a sequence of lessons. So let's take a look. Backward mapping, also known as backward design or backward planning, is the process that we use to design our support materials. We recommend it as the best way to design learning experiences in order to achieve specific learning goals. So the method starts with identifying those desired learning goals and outcomes. So what knowledge and skills do you want students to demonstrate? Then you work backwards to design your measures of success. So how will you assess and when? This includes designing your end-of-unit summative assessment task, together with marking guidelines and a sample response. That's so that you can check your expectations are fair and achievable for students. This step also includes identifying and designing those mini tasks that Val mentioned, and as a checkpoint to support students to be on track to meet the needs of the final summative task. Finally, you then design your sequence teaching and learning activities. So backward mapping is proven to be effective because it ensures strong alignment between learning goals, assessment opportunities, and instructional strategies. By beginning with the end in mind, we can create a clear and purposeful path to guide students towards those learning goals. So how will you see backward mapping embedded in our support for the Modern Languages K-10 syllabus? Something that may not be immediately obvious is that we backward mapped content and skills from stage 6 continuous to stage 4. The outcomes and content of the new syllabus provide a much clearer progression from stage 4 to stage 5 and into stage 6 continuous. So you're about to see the overviews that we published earlier in the year. Here we have the progressions of outcomes and content for creating texts. Here we have the progressions of outcomes and content for understanding texts. And here we have interacting. So we're just going to pause here on interacting. When we designed our support, we obviously focused on the outcomes and content for the relevant stage. Here is the stage 4 outcome and content. Yeah, the red outline there. And here is the stage 5 outcome and content. But we also ensured we designed opportunities for students to build their skills in the stage 6 continuous objectives. A specific example here is that students in continuous are required to reflect on aspects of the past. However, the past tense is not explicitly stated in the outcomes or content in stages 4 or 5. It's only in some examples for stage 5 in the new syllabus. So by including the past tense in our stage 5 resources, including our formative and summative assessment tasks, we've backward mapped from stage 6 into stage 5 to support student success. Now let's take a look at assessment on one of our scope and sequence documents. This is the generic one for stage 4, showing just term 1. Here you can see that a description of the summative assessment task is clearly outlined. Even though this is not required by NESA, the reason we include the final assessment task on the scope and sequence documents is to support backward mapping. So then we can identify the skills needed to complete the task and to provide direction for planning the teaching and learning activities in each unit of work. As you know, there are 3 outcomes in each stage: interacting, understanding texts, and creating texts. This slide shows the assessment tasks for all 4 units across the same stage 4 generic scope and sequence. As you can see, the 3 outcomes for stage 4 have been addressed through the assessment tasks. Now, assessment is a school-based decision, so our support materials are suggestions only. However, with only 3 outcomes per stage, we do suggest that you formally assess all 3 outcomes by the end of each stage. As I just mentioned, one of the features of the new syllabus is the outcomes and content allow for clearer progression into stage 6. So in stage 6, due to internal assessment requirements, teachers need to create tasks which assess students in a variety of ways, building a more complete picture of a student's overall achievement. An example of this is an interrelated task, where 2 or more skills are assessed within one task. The content from the text in one component of the task influences the receptive skills of the student and influences their productive responses. So you can see this interrelated task approach has been taken in both the term 1 and the term 4 assessment tasks. We just didn't get the extra, there it is, the green box. Yes, thanks, Karina. Let's look closely at term 2, back one, of the stage 4 generic scope and sequence, because it assesses interacting, which is one of the big shifts in the new syllabus. Many of you may find the interacting outcome the most challenging to assess, as interacting requires a level of spontaneity. This is reflected. People are telling me there's no sound. Can you still hear me, Karina?
Yeah, I can still hear you very clearly, Renetta.
Okay, I'll keep going then.
Thank you.
This is reflected in the content for Stage 4 interacting, which states that students are exchanging and negotiating meaning. This is different to a scripted and rehearsed role play, which would fall under the creating texts outcome. We also know that with an often large classes in Stage 4, it can be very difficult to get around to each student and experience their interactions in order to assess them against marking criteria. So what you can see here in the assessment column is a card game as a suggested summative task. I'll give you a moment to read it. You can see that a level of spontaneity is required because while students can learn and practice the vocabulary and structures in preparation for the task, they still need to apply that knowledge in a way that aligns with the cards they have randomly selected. Here's another example of assessing interacting, this time from the Stage 4 Japanese unit. Remember, we really encourage you to look at all of our support, regardless of which language you teach, as each scope and sequence and unit will provide you with a wealth of ideas. I'll just give you a moment to read it. The last dot point, though, referring to aizuchi for people who don't speak Japanese, is about little interjections with Japanese speakers that they use to indicate they are paying attention. Once again, we have an interrelated assessment task here, with the understanding texts component also acting as a stimulus and scaffold for the interacting component. Students know in advance they will be looking at a flyer for a cultural event and choosing activities with reasons to plan to attend. The spontaneity comes in because they don't know what activities will be on offer or when, and this may impact their choices and reasons. To assess the interacting outcome as a summative end of unit task, there are a few main points to remember. There must be an information gap between the students interacting in order to assess a student's ability to apply their communication skills with some degree of spontaneity. Remember, if they're just rote learning content to interact, then you're actually assessing the creating texts outcome. The interaction also needs to be reciprocal. So if it is an interview style of task, make sure you include in your marking guidelines the need for participants to discuss answers. So not just one person asking questions or not just one person answering questions. And consider how students can demonstrate an A grade compared to B or C and so on. Consider what scaffolds or prompts could enable students to achieve the interacting outcome. Create sample interactions and consider what language skills are required to achieve a certain grade and whether all students can achieve the grade that they deserve. So moving now from assessment on our scope and sequence documents to assessment within our units of work. Let's first explain how these two documents link. In our support, we have taken one term from the scope and sequence and fully unpacked it into a unit of work. So for Stage 4 Japanese, we took term 4, Let's Go to a Festival, on the scope and sequence and created the fully resourced unit of work. And for Stage 5 Japanese, we took term 4 Year 9 Japanese Travels. While we don't have French on the slide, I can tell you that for Stage 4 French, we unpacked term 3, which explores homes and the neighbourhood, And for stage 5 French, we have unpacked term 3 of year 9, which is all about free time activities. So let's look at how we've addressed assessment in each of the units we've created. Not only will you find the assessment details on the scope and sequence, you'll also see them at the beginning of the units of work, just before the learning sequence. Just before the learning sequences begin, and again at the end with sample answers and a suggested marking criteria. We'll look at those more closely later. Remember, the summative assessment task is the bedrock of the unit. So by providing this at the start, you have a clear understanding of what students are expected to understand, know and do by the end of the unit. Again, this promotes backward mapping of formative tasks and therefore enables feedback that is relevant, valuable and purposeful. To further enhance student engagement, we have created a learning map for each unit, which provides students with a snapshot of the unit's learning journey, including the content of each learning sequence, the mini tasks, and the final assessment task. Here you can see the unit of work infographic for stage 4 French called Let's Go to Town. Remember, this is student facing, so it's actually not a programming document. However, it still makes the process clear, and it also supports the Aboriginal pedagogies of learning maps and symbols and images. So let's unpack the backward mapping and assessment in action here. The end of term summative task is another interrelated one. Students demonstrate their ability to understand texts and then create a response. I'll give you a moment to read it. So let's look at the content and format of the unit, which supports students to achieve this end of term task. The first lesson sequence in this 10-week unit is all about describing where you live and your home, and the related mini task is to play the role of a real estate agent describing a home in the local area. The second learning sequence looks at describing your home and its rooms in detail. The related mini task is to create a presentation of your home and to share with a prospective exchange student. And then this lesson sequence looks at the local area, the facilities and how to find your way around. And the mini task is an interaction to find your way around a French town. So these 3 lesson sequences and their related mini tasks all relate directly to one or more aspects of the final task, showing a clear connection between the formative mini task progress checkpoints and the final summative assessment task. The other reason for mini tasks is that our 10-week units don't align nicely with reporting periods. We understand that. With reports generally being written mid-term, these mini tasks can therefore provide a snapshot of student progress before the end of the unit. And if you need to use them for summative purposes, you easily can. You would just need to develop marking guidelines, and we'll lead you through that process in a moment. By beginning with the end in mind, we can create a clear and purposeful path to guide students towards those goals. I'll now hand over to Karina, who will take us on the journey of creating sample responses and marking guidelines.
Thank you, Renetta, and hi, everybody. We are aware that there are some questions coming in the chat, and we'll gladly answer these. There'll be time at the end. So first of all, we started designing our support and we didn't think about creating sample responses, but we soon realised that they were central to supporting student success. In this section, I'm going to unpack why. Let's take a look at an example summative assessment task for the travel unit of Stage 5 Japanese on our website. In a moment, we will look at the sample response and the marking guidelines. I'll give you a few moments to read the task. You'll notice on the bottom right-hand corner of this slide a symbol from the Aboriginal 8 Ways, and it refers to Aboriginal Pedagogy Community Links, as this task has a real-life purpose, context and audience, and the student can share their learning beyond the classroom, in this case as a blog. Can we get a thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you already create sample responses when designing your assessment task? And there's no judgment here. Right, hopefully the team can see. Are we getting some responses there?
Yes, we are.
Excellent.
A few thumbs up and hands up.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for your response.
And a sometimes.
That's okay too. All of it's okay. And if you're not doing it, that's okay as well. All right. You might already create sample responses, but if you don't, we strongly recommend this as an early part of your planning process. Getting this right sets up both the unit of work and therefore your students for success in achieving the learning intentions of the unit. Sample responses help you to understand more deeply what is required to do the task. Identify language and communication skills so that everything in your unit supports students to achieve success. This also reduces unnecessary content, one of the key aims of curriculum reform. Evaluate if the task design, description, and marking guidelines actually work before you share the task with the students. If it does not work for you or is not clear for you, how will the students know what to do to be able to achieve it? Support consistent teacher judgment and collaboration. If the sample is written in English, with the modern language K-10 syllabus forming a framework for all languages, teachers can use the same task across languages in their school or region and collaborate to work on the task description, marking guidelines, and have discussions to establish a common understanding of these. They can also be shared with students so the expectations of the task are clear. How you choose to do this is up to you. You may wish to do this in English as part of the assessment notification, or you can share an example in the target language at the start of the unit to show the students what they'll be able to achieve by the end of the unit. You could also unpack a sample response in the target language as part of a What a Good One Looks Like or WAGOL activity. Unpacking the features as part of an explicit literacy activity. Just make sure mobile devices are packed away if showing any samples in the target language so students cannot take a photograph. Now let's take a look at one for the Stage 5 Japanese Travels blog task at an A grade level. This is what the sample response for the Stage 5 Japanese travel blog looks like. It is written in English so that teachers can use it as an example for use with other languages too. Providing a sample in English allows you to show students an example of what a good one looks like without them having the language version that may just be copied. Of course, as I said, if you want to provide the language version, this is entirely open to your discretion and your context. This is for blog post number 1, talking about a city location. And you'll notice on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, a symbol from Aboriginal 8 Ways. It refers to the Aboriginal pedagogy, deconstruct, reconstruct, watch first, then do. This is blog post 2, addressing a rural location. And this is blog post 3, addressing a place to stay. In the interests of transparency, I'd like to say that marking guidelines have been one of the most discussed topics in our work related to the new syllabus, with rigorous discussion. We've come up with one approach, which we'll now look at. However, we are currently working on assessment guidelines support document to unpack other approaches. We have a great deal of consideration to marking guidelines in relation to how they align with the outcomes and content and what teachers need across a range of contexts in New South Wales schools. On the slide is the outcome and content for Stage 5 creating texts. We acknowledge that in their marking guidelines, some teachers may wish to address only the outcome itself. Others may wish to address the outcome and some of the related content headings and dot points. And others may want to focus on the relevant content dot points only. You could even design marking guidelines which are a hybrid of some of these. Assessment and reporting are school-based decisions, and all of these options are okay. What matters is that there is a clear link between your marking guidelines and the syllabus. We will show you an example of where we landed and why. This is not a directive, but it is an option for you to consider. In deciding on your approach, you should consider your school processes, discuss with your head teacher, and choose the approach that suits your context best. Back to Stage 5 Japanese Travels task, creating 3 blog posts. The outcome we are assessing is Stage 5, creating texts, creates a range of texts for diverse communicative purposes by manipulating culturally appropriate language. What we found was that if we only focused on the outcome itself, we were not considering the syllabus intent fully, and we were not addressing the content points that are the true goals and indicators of what students can do in the language. So then we looked at the content dot points for this outcome, and we chose the ones which related to the task. Of the 10 content dot points, we realised that our task addressed 7 of them. Sometimes it may be less and sometimes more. It will depend on your task. We strongly encourage you to consider beyond the outcomes themselves and explore the content points most relevant to the task and learning intentions of the unit and build your marking guidelines from there. Next, we identified that we wanted to assess through the task and organised it into 5 main aspects. Have students address the content requirements of the task? Have they addressed the text type? And have they used a broad range of vocabulary and grammar structures? Using appropriate script and culturally appropriate language. Next, we aligned the 5 aspects we wanted to assess to the relevant content dot points of the outcome which we had selected. On the slide is what we wanted to assess. The content requirements of the task align to the syllabus content dot points. The blog text type related to this syllabus content dot point. Students' ability to use a broad range of vocabulary and grammar related to these 2 syllabus content dot points. Using appropriate script, these 2 dot points. And using culturally appropriate language, this dot point. From here, we then took our A grade sample response and developed the descriptions for the marking guidelines against the relevant content dot points. Create informative texts. Plan, construct, and edit texts. Adjust vocabulary and control and manipulate grammatical structures. Use sound symbol correspondence and features of the writing system. and adjust and adapt language appropriate to culture. Then we designed the wording for grades B through to E. This is an example of one of the content dot points wording grades A to E. I'll give you a moment to take a look. We've carefully considered the use of words such as extensive, thorough, sound, basic, and elementary. We encourage you to choose these terms carefully, then stick to them so that your students will understand what they mean and what is expected. Furthermore, teachers who are collaborating across languages will also have a common understanding for consistent teacher judgment. The example we've just unpacked was deliberately complex to show you all of the steps in our thinking. Here's a much simpler example for Stage 4 French, assessing interacting. Students are discussing food and drink choices for an upcoming class party to celebrate Bastille Day. And here are the corresponding marking guidelines, this time assessing only 3 content dot points from the Stage 4 interacting outcome. The last thing we'd like to address today in terms of assessment is supporting all students to succeed. The purpose of assessment is to allow students to demonstrate their learning so that they can feel confident in the language use, feel a sense of achievement, and so that both you and they can set their next learning goals. It is important to set our students up for success. In our assessment advice at the end of the unit of work, we have provided some guidance for students in planning for their task. This sets the students up for success, giving them ideas and clarity around how to go about doing the task. Different students will need different support, and this will depend on your context. Students with special needs may need scaffolds, word banks, sentence builders, and this can apply to students with disability or students who are HPGE and want to extend further, manipulating the language to other contexts or in complexity. Students with disability may need support with digital planners, scaffolds, or alternative presentation means. Planning scaffolds helps students think more deeply, unpack their thinking, plan to ensure they cover the required criteria, and also plan to ensure they are using a broad range of language and structures required to achieve at those A and B levels. There are many ways you can provide planners to students. This is the example that goes with the Stage 5 Japanese travel unit. On the right, we can see the task description clearly outlined for students. On the left is part of the planner we've provided to students with an example of the city location, point 1, and an example of the accommodation element, point 3. Next come the blog inclusions for students to consider. My apologies, I'll just go back a click there. So including a range of activities, transport options to each destination, prices, places to eat that you enjoyed and relevant to each experience where they are located. And the accommodation you stayed in, and the location, price, inclusions, how to get there, and your opinion with reasons. Then the description and recommendation for each experience and why, along with our cultural reflection. The blog formatting was in the planning section on the previous slide. The questions and prompts on this planner encourage students to think about the language and text type they can use, then apply it to their own areas of interest and exploration. Even if you decide to do the task as an in-class task, this preparation and reflection sets students up for success. We've also provided a starting point for some considerations you might include for differentiating the task for a range of learners. Differentiating the task or teaching and learning activities will depend on your own context. Sometimes you may need to differentiate for different proficiency levels and sometimes for learning needs, or maybe sometimes you'll not need to differentiate at all. If you have any other ideas for differentiating, we'd love you to pop them into the chat, and all ideas are welcome, big or small. So just get the team members, just have a look at the chat for a moment and just see if we are getting any ideas for differentiation. We'd love to hear from you. You might even see some of your ideas appear in future units of work we write. Are there any ideas being popped in there at the moment, Renetta?
Not at the moment.
Okay, people might be reflecting and that's okay too, but if you'd like to add them as we keep presenting, then you're very welcome to. I'm now going to hand back to Renetta to conclude today's presentation.
Thanks, Karina. We hope today supports you to design assessment with the new syllabus. We also hope our approach to assessment gives you flexibility to adapt to your own contexts. To support the aims of curriculum reform, our assessment opportunities and tasks allow students to engage more deeply in the content, building deep understanding and confidence. We also hope they are clear and explicit for you to use, guiding you through the process and reducing your cognitive load. Before we finish, I'm going to run through a reminder of other support that we have available. If you teach in a New South Wales public school, the main source of our support is the Languages Statewide Staff Room. If you're not already a member, please take a moment now to join. There's a link in the chat, and this is where all our support is advertised. For those of you outside the department, we have our blog and our social media channels. All our support for modern languages is on our webpage section. To access support for the Modern Languages K-10 syllabus, click on Planning, Programming and Assessing Languages 7 to 10. You will find programming guidelines, generic scope and sequence, and language-specific resource sets. French and Japanese are now live, and we're currently working on Chinese, Spanish, German, and Italian. Other languages will follow depending on the availability of teacher writers. You may have seen we've created an implementation journey to support you with the new syllabus. We will update this in the next week to include links to today's session, as well as the launches for French and Japanese, and share it in the statewide staff room. Remember, in addition to our resources, we have also developed a 1-hour accredited PD course. Finally, much of our professional learning is also running through local network meetings. These are K-12 and cross-sectoral. We have 19 networks across the state, and these are so important for language teachers. Networks are how we work with teachers on the ground, facilitating local PL and collaborative planning. The link is on the screen and in the chat, and that will take you to who to connect to for each area. And just on 45 minutes, that concludes our presentation. We're going to stop recording. Thank you everybody for coming, and please hang around if you have questions, but we will stop the recording right now.
It is now stopped. Oh, actually, it should be. It says it's still recording. We'll try again.
Yeah.